Good evening, friends. I welcome you all here in this webinar today being conducted by TNV Academy. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our eminent speaker, Mr. Srinivasan Sitaraman today, who is going to talk to us about implementation of ISO 14001 within organizations. In this webinar today, Mr. Sitaraman will discuss this topic in detail along with some real life examples he has experienced in the industry. Our distinguished speaker, Mr. Sitaraman, has done his post-graduation in chemistry from Annamalai University, India. He is also a lead auditor in 9001, 14001 and 45001 ISO standards. He has an industrial experience of around 30 plus years in various industries ranging from manufacturing of primary and secondary batteries, non-ferrous alloys, lamp components, and has worked in organizations based in India, South Africa, and Sultanate of Oman. He has been imparting training to a number of organizations, entrepreneurs, and individuals on various topics related to ISO terminologies, their certification, and implementation within the organizations. It was just a brief introduction of our guest speaker today. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Srinivasan Sitaraman. I may request Mr. Sitaraman now to please start the session on implementation of ISO 14001 within organizations.
A very good evening to all of you, and thank you very much to TNU Academy for giving me the opportunity to host yet another webinar. And this time it is going to be steps to implementation of ISO 14001 2015. So it's nice to see many participants in this webinar, and we will have around 40 to 45 minutes session. At the end of it, we will have a question and answer. So in between, if you have any queries, you can put it in the chat box, and our moderator will compile all of them, and we'll take these questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, so today's webinar is focusing on environmental management system. So I've got three things to do here. First session, I'll be focusing on introduction to ISO 14001 2015. So what it is and how it was developed and what is the necessity for this standard. All those things we'll talk about in that section. In the second section, we'll be talking about how organizations can go about implementing this standard in their respective organizations. So how a stepwise approach to implementing the standard. And then at the end of it, I will have the question and answer session where I will be answering all your queries. Hope this is okay with you. So we'll go ahead with the presentation. First one is introduction to ISO 14001 2015. So we just need to understand about the standard before we talk about implementing this in our organization. What is ISO 14001? It's a international standard. It is published by International Organization for Standardization, that is ISO, for environmental management systems. So ISO is a body which is responsible for publishing the standards. It is a non-profit organization. There are a lot of technical committees within the ISO who are responsible for developing these standards. For ISO 14001, the technical committee designated is TC207. So they are responsible for developing the standards relating to environmental management systems. Same way, there is another technical committee, TC176, which is developing ISO 9001 quality management system standards. So the committee number is fixed. Only members will be keep on rotating. These members are coming from various countries. They are the members of ISO, so they will be participating in the deliberations and then developing the standards. Okay, so the technical committee 207 is dedicated to ISO 14001. So what is the ISO 14001 talks about? It provides a framework for improving the environmental performance of the organizations. So it gives a structured approach for organizations to set about their goals, objectives, and how to carry out their programs to meet those objectives. So that is what ISO 14001 facilitates organizations. That structured approach is very important. Another thing which is focusing is towards continual improvement on improvement of 3 R's. I used to call them 3 R's, which is reduce, reuse, and recycle. So when I talk of environmental performance improvement, the 3 R's should be coming to our first attention. First, in the same order, reduce first, then reuse, and then recycle. So what do you mean by reduce? So if you are using some materials, we try to optimize them so that we don't waste unnecessary usage of materials, which is going to lose the natural resources, and then excess will lead to wastage. So that can be avoided. So reduce is optimizing the usage of resources in the organization. Suppose you have made some material which is not conforming, which is going to be rejected, try to reuse them. Maybe as a rework. In many organizations, we have got a certain percentage of rework being added with the virgin materials, so that the material is not wasted, even it is reused. So that is a second way of looking at it. First focus should be reduce. If at all we have used excess and there is a spillage, there is a wastage, we can try to reuse them in a particular proportion so that the properties of the end product is not affected. Then the third is recycle. Suppose you have generated some waste, try to see if anybody has got some use of that waste, and then try to give it to them, either for a consideration or maybe even free of cost, so that we are not polluting the environment. So reduce, reuse, recycle, this should be the order. Another example I can give is printing of paper. Like if there is a mail coming in, you will always see at the end of the mail there will be a message which says consider your environmental responsibility before printing. So if you can read it on the email and forget it, it is okay. It is not necessary to print all the emails in the organization. Suppose you have to print it for getting signature and keep a record or something like that, you can go ahead and print it, but then you can reuse the other side of the paper once the purpose is resolved. So that is reusing the paper. So once you have used both sides of the paper, then think of recycling it. Instead of just dumping it in the bin and then going to municipal waste, maybe you can shred the paper and then send it for recycling. So what we are doing is we are cutting down the requirement of trees by using this paper again in another form. So we can preserve the trees for future. So reduce, reuse, recycle, this is going towards environmental performance improvement. So like that, everybody should look at in their own areas, influence, what they can reduce, which is being used excessively, and then what they can reuse, as well as if they can recycle their waste, and that is going to wealth. So that is what we have to focus. And then why ISO 14001? This question also need to be asked by organizations before they go about implementing. So that why will give the motivation for the organization that they have to implement because of these points. First of all, everybody should be having awareness about the environment. It is not for the environmental management system. We are also part of the environment. So human beings are part of environment. We cannot be parting with it. So we need to know what is going on around us, and then what are all the things which is affecting the environment. We need to be aware of it. That the awareness will bring in a lot of responsibility among ourselves to act consciously to reduce our wastage and reduce the pollution, preventing pollution and conservation of resources. So that is what we call environmental conservation. That means preventing pollution and preserving natural resources for future generations. Remember 10 years, 15 years before, nobody was talking about rainwater harvesting. Nowadays, the rainwater harvesting has become a very important movement, that even the buildings are not given permission before they show the blueprint for how they are going to have rainwater harvesting. So that is the changing scenario, because there is always water shortage. There is so much of rain happening, but then it's all flood in one time, and then during the necessary time, summer season, there is water shortage. So this is what is happening in the environment because of various reasons. Our own making, a lot of things are happening, like greenhouse gases. Because of the global warming is happening, and then ice caps are melting, and then the water levels in the oceans are rising, and then low-lying areas are getting inundated. So there is so much of climate change. They talk about all the time, El Ninos, all those things are talking about environment. So what we can do in ourselves, our influence, as well as in our organization, that we do not aggressively impacting the environment in a negative way. So that's what is environmental conservation. Understanding the interaction of organizations' activities on the environment. So whatever activities, processes we are doing, so what is the kind of interaction of those processes, products, and services in the environment? So when I say environment, it is nothing but air, water, and land. These are the three things where our activities are impacting. So that's why we need to be aware of our interaction with those three mediums. And then we should not be causing negative impact or minimizing the negative impact on the environment. For example, if you are going for a certification, already you may have some kind of issues with the environmental pollution which you are generating, which we want to minimize. I cannot say all are doing without any pollution in the environment. So first, when you set up the system, we have to take stock of what is the current level, how we can minimize going forward by putting the system into place and then showing a continual improvement. That is why not causing negative impact or minimizing the negative impact. Also, reducing the environmental footprint. That means everybody is contributing to carbon footprint in the global scenario. Like, every day we are consuming electricity. 70% of the electricity in India is coming from thermal power stations, which are contributing to global warming. So only 30% is coming from other sources like hydro power or wind power or other, nuclear power and these things. So, but still majority is coming from coal-fired power stations. So we need to understand we are also contributing to footprint indirectly. Also through our organizations, when we are operating products and services, through that also we are having some kind of pollution coming out, which is also contributing to global warming, which is nothing but the carbon footprint I'm talking about. So we have to see how we can reduce that footprint by doing activities which are going to reduce the usage of these natural resources and also reuse recycling in terms of improving the situation. Also, it will help us to have a good public image and credibility about the organization, that this organization is caring towards the environment. It is also a member of responsible care organization, and also it's a responsible corporate citizen. Some amount of our profits are going towards improving the environment. That will be on the balance sheet. So these are the things we can do to improve the public image of our organization in the eye of the public. And then improved compliance obligations. By following this standard, we are also improving our compliance to legal requirements and other requirements. That's what we call compliance obligations. Okay, so these are the things. The why part is being addressed here. Also, the saving money on the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. It is not only improving the environmental performance, but also saving money for organization. When you start reducing your usage, naturally your cost of product is also going down, and then reuse and recycle also will be improving the bottom line for the company. So that is a continual improvement in environmental performance. So this is the why part of why we need to implement this ISO 14001. Now coming to the development of ISO 14000, how it was developed, the timeline. If you look at it, how it all started in 1992 when the British standard 7750 was launched, and then declaration of Rio de Janeiro on environmental and development. So on that meeting, this British standard 7750 was launched. So that is again towards environmental performance improvement. Organizations could adopt and then show improvement in their performance. So that was the first step towards implementing this 14001. In 1993, after almost 11 years, there is a committee to develop ISO 14000 was set up in ISO body, and they will be developing the ISO 14000 framework. Also, European Commission developed Eco Management Audit Scheme, that is otherwise called EMAS. So in 1993, European Commission set up this EMAS scheme through which organizations can get audited, and then they can show compliance to this EMAS scheme by improving the performance. That is a big step towards showing environmental performance improvement for organization. Like this EMAS scheme was very well recognized in the European continent, and then it was also getting popularized in other. Then in 1996, the first version of ISO 14000 was published. So that's the first time ISO 14001 was published as a ISO standard. Before that, it was a EMAS scheme. Even before that, it was a British standard. So they take the best of these standard points, and then they included the ISO elements, and then they made this standard ISO 14001 in 1996. So after almost 8 years, it was revised. Normally, standards are revised every 5 years, because always we have to keep ourselves updated with the latest changes happening in the world. So it will take, the start will happen in 5 years. Then there will be a kind of draft, and then that will put to vote, and then there will be a lot of corrections and revisions will be happening. Finally, it will be published as a standard. So 2004, the first revision of ISO 14001 standard was done. So that is 2004. And then again 2015, that was a giant leap in terms of improvement in the standard. One is that is the second revision of ISO 14001. It included the risk-based thinking and the process approach in the PDCA form, as well as the main thing, which is the life cycle perspective, was also introduced in this particular standard. So that's why 2015, it's a second revision of ISO 14000. So currently what we are using is the second revision, but it has gone through these 5 stages right from 1992. This standard has been in the making in different shapes. but it took the real shape as ISO standard in 1996. So now in 2015, it is the second revision of the standard. Okay. Now, when I look at the ISO 14001 2015 version, it is also one of the important thing is the Annex SL high-level structure, which was adopted right from 2013 by making all organizations, it is easy for them to adopt to the international standards, because the structure was very similar. A couple of days before, we had looked at in the webinar for 9001 implementation, the structure was very similar. Same way, we are also looking at the structure, Annex SL high-level structure, which has got 10 clauses, which are basically scope, normative reference, terms and definitions, and context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and then improvement. These 10 clauses are constant for all the management system standards right from 2013 onwards. Out of this, from class 4 to class 10, these are the 7 clauses where organization is to show requirements for getting certified. There are various shall requirements which organization has to comply, and the auditors will be verifying them before issuing the certification or before recommending the certification. So that is why we have got it as a requirement, and the title of the standard also says ISO 14001 Environmental Management System Standards Requirements. Okay. So now we'll be looking at the PDCA concept, how it is adopted in this ISO 14001 2015. So as you can see, clause 1, 2, 3 are not requirements. They are kept out of the requirement. It is only for reference purpose. So you will see from class 4 to class 10 is following the PDCA approach. Like any other management system standard, this also follows the same approach, whereas 4 clauses are dedicated for planning. So if you plan well, your execution is going to be smooth. That's why 4 clauses dedicated for planning, which is a robust planning, which will result in smooth execution under clause 8, which is operation. And then in clause 9, we are checking whether we are following the plan or not. And if there is any deviation, we have to do course correction. So that improvement will come in the next cycle. Wherever we are doing course correction, we are eliminating mistakes so that we are not repeating those mistakes again. It's a root cause analysis and corrective action which is going towards eliminating the mistakes. So that is why you see PDCA approach right from 2000 onwards. ISO has adopted PDCA approach, and this has been refined in the 2015 version of the standard. Okay. So if I go into this PDCA cycle, what all things are involved in the planning. Environmental policy has to be stated upfront for the organization, which will be signed by the top management. Also, this policy will consider the internal and external issues the organization is facing, and what are the needs and expectations of the interested parties. Here I talk about interested parties is the public or the community, neighboring community around the organization, because they are going to be the first personnel to be impacted by the organization's activities, products and services. Then also the employees, as well as the environment, which is a silent spectator. It cannot talk about for self, but it is getting impacted by the organization. So we need to consider the way the organization is impacting the environment, the air, the water, and the land around the organization. So these are the things we have to consider, and then the policy is formulated. And then we have to look at the risk and opportunities, as well as aspects of organizations' activities and their interaction with the environment, that I call aspects and impacts. We will talk about it in detail later. And also the compliance obligations, the legal requirements and other requirements which organization has to comply. You have to include it in the planning. Then only you will make up the management system which will be robust enough to address all these requirements. And then we will come up with the objectives and environmental management programs, which I call EMPs. So that will be done to fulfill the policy and the objectives. So that is why the plan has to be made first, and then the plan will lead to execution. Now here we have to put up the structure and responsibility. Like a top management is doing the planning with the management team, but alone they cannot implement, so they need to put up the proper structure similar to the ISO 9001, so they can be adding these responsibilities of environmental management system to the existing structure. And then they have to train them and make them aware, and then make them competent in handling these environmental performance measurements. So that is why training, awareness and competence specific to EMS is also required. And documentation, if already a system is existing for ISO 9001, we have to add the EMS elements, and we can easily integrate the standard with the ISO 9001 standard. If you can see, most of the time first organization will go for 9001 standard. Then only they will go for 14,001 or 45,000 or any other standard, because 9001 gives the basic framework for all organizations. Then they can build on by adding this environment, occupational health and safety, energy, and information security, all those things on top of that. You will have already a documentation existing. You just need to add the EMS elements into it. Okay, and then operational control specific to environmental point of view, the environmental performance, the waste we are generating, how are we going to control it, the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. All those things we have to talk about. That's where we have operational controls existing, so we do not impact the environment negatively. And then emergency preparedness and response. Suppose in case any untoward incident happens, how are you going to react to that emergency or spillage or leakage or a kind of release to the environment? How are we going to contain it? So we have to do a lot of drills so that we perfect our response to the real emergency. That's what we call emergency preparedness and response. We have to improve our response every time, so when the real emergency comes, we are more than ever prepared to address this issue. So that is why these are all coming under the execution part. Once you have done the execution, now we have to look at how we are going to check and correct ourselves against the plan. We have to see whether we have deviated with the plan or we are sticking to the plan. So we have to check them, and if there is a deviation, we have to correct them. So that's where we are doing monitoring and measurement. What all parameters related to environmental, along with the quality, you will also be monitoring. So when you do monitoring and measurement, we also need to ensure the instruments are calibrated and they are properly maintained for the measurements regarding environmental performance. Then all these things have to be recorded. Records management is very important. So that is showing evidence of whether you have done the measurements or not. And then finally, we are also doing internal external audits. Internal audits are done by organization, external audits are done by the certification body to see that we are following the standard requirements as well as company procedures and things like that. Then incident, suppose any incident happens, we are doing correction, corrective action, all those things are done. And then we are looking at improvement, which is basically course correction and looking for the next cycle. What all things we have learned, we need to implement in the next cycle of planning so that the continual improvement happens. So the entire PDCA cycle, the top management is playing a very vital role. They are involved in planning right from the beginning, setting up the policy till management review, where they take note of what is the improvement in the performance, what all the resources required, where we have not done well, what we need to do. All the thing they take responsibility, and then they focus on those things. That's why it is going in the forward direction. So this PDCA cycle, if it is done on a regular basis, you see improvements happening. Every cycle there will be improvement because we are eliminating mistakes and improving our performance. And the standard is acting as a wedge so that the performance does not slide down if there is any problem. So we will be achieving the previous level of achievement. We will not go down below that. So that is what we call improved environmental performance by following the PDCA approach. So the PDCA approach, high level structure, risk-based thinking, and life cycle perspective. These are the 4 things we should know when the new standard revision has been included. Now we'll look at this session 2, where how do we go about implementing this ISO 14001 in organizations. The steps towards implementing ISO 14001. First is preparation. We have to prepare the organization, the team involved in that, and also the employees. So that's all going into preparation, understanding the issues. All those things will come in the step. We will see in detail. I'll just briefly touch about all the basic steps. Documentation. As I mentioned earlier, 9001 will already be implemented in the organization. So it will be an extension of documentation where we will be adding specific elements to environmental management system, like waste control, and also like how do we reduce our impact on the environment, what all things we have to have, operational control procedures that will be added, maybe then aspects and impacts we have to keep as a document. These are the things specific to environmental management system will go into this documentation. So it is an extension of documentation already there. So in the next step, we'll be talking on implementation. This is a very important step. Preparation and implementation. These two are very, very significant steps in the implementation of 14001, because here people have to be trained and so many other things have to be done. We will cover it in detail. This is a very important step. And once you are satisfied with the proper implementation, then we have to conduct an internal audit to check whether the implementation has gone as per plan or not. So that is why internal audit is also a very important step before we call the certification body, we have to check ourselves whether we are doing right. Like, you before the board exam, there will be a pre-board 1, pre-board 2. So that is done in the school level, so that they can see whether the students are prepared for taking the board examination. Same way, the internal audit is a step towards ensuring the organization is ready to face the external certification audit. So very important. Then comes final step is certification, which involves audit, and then certification body will verify the conformance to the requirements, and then they will give the certification. So now we will go into detail of each and every step. So in the preparation stage, we need to understand the context of the organization, because the clause 4 requirement states we need to understand the external internal issues. From the quality point of view, we would have seen it already as the quality management system, but now we need to include the environmental elements to it. So what all ways organizations contributing to environmental performance, right from the raw material procurement till the final disposal of the waste and the end of life of the product. So the entire cycle, that is why we call life cycle perspective. We have to understand the whole internal external issues. If you look at this diagram, you can see there are external issues on the left hand side as well as the right hand side. Whereas left hand side is associated with the raw materials, the resources we are using, all of them towards making the products and services in the organization, that is being talked about. Whereas on the right hand side, the products we are making, and then the delivery of it, and the customer using, and the end usage, disposal, all those activities and processes related to that will be talked about. Then within the organization, which is very much under our control, how do we control the waste? How are we improving our performance? What are all our emissions in water, air, and land we need to be aware of, and how are we going to control it? So all that we have to talk about within this organization. And you see, when we talk about raw materials, how they are mined, how they are transported, what is the supplier responsibility in terms of environmental performance, all those things we have to, wherever we have influence, like if we have got influence on our suppliers, we should be able to improve their performance by demanding certain things from environmental friendly way. Same way with the customers, as far as practicable, we have to see that we have our responsibility towards the environment. At the customer end, what all education to be given, how do we use the product, how do we dispose of the product, those kind of instructions to be given, so that we are also not polluting the environment. A simple example will be the lead acid batteries. You see, at the end of lead acid batteries, when it is discharged, they can bring it back to the dealer, and they get a discount on the new battery. So this is a good way of getting back the product, so that it doesn't lie in the environment and then polluting. The lead pollution is very dangerous. So you are able to bring back the material, and then we are recycling it. So that is very, very important. So that is the environmental responsibility of the organization. The life cycle, how are you controlling? Okay, so now this whole context we have to understand. In this, we are looking at internal external issues as well as needs and expectations of interested parties. As I said, interested parties will be the community, the employees, the flora and fauna, which is a silent spectator of the whole thing. We need to understand all their needs and expectations, and also the aquatic life, the ecology around the organization. All this need to be protected. If we are making some kind of pollution, we have to see how can we minimize. We cannot make it zero, because there has to be some kind of emissions will be happening, but how can we show improvement on a year-to-year basis? So that's what we have to look at. Okay, this is the context of the organization. We need to understand and then capture all those issues in the documentation. Now, in the preparation stage, the approach to implementation. First step is understanding the context of the organization we just saw now. Then we have to define the scope. That means what is going to be covered under the environmental management system. Is it similar to quality management system? Then we can use the same scope, like manufacture of whatever products and services, we can have the same thing, but we need to define it clearly where we are impacting the environment. We should be including the operations and processes in the scope. Otherwise, we are defeating the purpose of getting this certification. Our aim is to improve the performance. So include all the activities, processes which are already having an interaction with the environment, and there is a possibility of improving the performance. We have to include it in the scope. So that is very important. And this is a mandatory document. It has to be documented and maintained scope. Then we have to form a core team who will be responsible for implementation. It can be an extension of the team which was used to implement 9001, with additional people relating to handling of chemicals, and people with the knowledge of chemistry and other things. Also environmental department, these members are also can be co-opted as members in this core team for effective implementation of this standard. Then we will look at the role responsibility. Already you have got a role and responsibility structure in place. We just have to add the environmental performance related responsibilities, the monitoring, measurement, the aspects control, the operation control procedures, following of that. These kind of roles and responsibilities have to be assigned to the team, or you can add members with additional responsibilities. So that also can be done in the preparation stage. So the team is clear cut what is to be done and who is responsible for what. And most important is the top management support. Without top management support, nothing can be achieved. So that's why they are the people who are signing the environmental policy and giving the full commitment towards improving the performance. That's why top management support has to be there. We did see it in the PDCA approach also. The top management is in the center of everything. So that support is to be given for this implementation, successful implementation. Then we go for doing a gap analysis. That means there is a standard requirement from class 4 to class 10. What is already available in the organization? Like if you implemented ISO 9001, most of the documentation, the skeletal structure will be available. So some additional elements will be required from the EMS point of view. So this gap analysis, element by element, clause by clause, we see what is the requirement and what is currently present in the organization. So we see the gap. So that gap has to be identified, and that's what we call gap analysis. That can be done either by the organization, or they can also engage a consultant who can come and do this gap analysis and submit a report. So now we can see from the gap analysis what we need to do so that we can plan actions towards it. Okay. With the gap analysis, we will know what is the kind of work involved, so we can finalize the project plan and timeline, how long it is going to take, and what all things are involved in this project. So this is a preparation stage. That's like a kickstart of this implementation, I would say. Now coming to the documentation. This fairly easy because, as I mentioned earlier, 9001 setup is already there. No organization directly goes for 14,000. Normally they go for 9001. So the pretty much the structure is already available. We need to add those elements of environmental management system in that. So when I say documented information, it includes both documents and records. We have done a separate webinar on that, so we can understand what is document, what is record. Very important to know the difference between them, and that is also there. And there are important documents to be maintained and retained in this particular environmental management system standard. First, I said the scope statement, clearly defining the boundaries and what are all the processes involved in the certification process, so that they all will be audited. Okay, scope statement under 4.3 of the standard. Then environmental policy signed by the top management, showing the commitment towards improvement in the environmental performance, prevention of pollution, and conservation of natural resources. These are the three things which they will be looking at in this policy. So we have to show the evidence of that. The policy is also very important document to be maintained. Then aspects register, a kind of information which talks about what are all the activities of the organization, what are their interaction with the environment, what is the impact coming out of it. So that has to be assessed properly, and that whole thing has to be maintained as an aspect register. That's very important towards implementation. Okay. Then objectives and EMPs. Once you have got the aspects, and then you develop the objectives towards achieving our policy, and then that will lead to a lot of environmental management programs. That means a time-bound program to improve the performance on various aspects. So these are all to be documented and maintained. Then procedures, critical procedures where, as I said earlier, more than one person is operating, you need to have a document. So there are operation control procedures which will show that how we have to control the impact on the environment. So these are the procedures which are important for functioning of the standard. And then work instructions, nuts and bolts of each and everything, how to measure these parameters, how to take care of this environmental impact, those things for the operator level, easily understandable language. These work instructions are written, and that is also to be documented. Then forms where you are recording the parameters of environmental monitoring and measurement. So these forms also have to be developed and kept. So these are the documentation. They will be in addition to other documents which are already existing in the management system, quality management system. Okay. So this documentation. Now coming to implementation. This is very, very important step where we have got a lot of understanding to be given. First, training of the employees. So first time they are getting exposed to the environmental management system. So we have to give a brief about what is happening in the environment, what is the global issues. So not directly coming to the operation of the organization, we are also giving a perspective to them. What is the kind of issues the humanity is facing currently, the global warming, the greenhouse gases which are increasing, and also the El Nino, the weather patterns which are very chaotic nowadays, and the climate change. All that has to be told to the employees so that they get a sensitization about this environmental conservation. So the training to the employees will talk about the awareness. Okay, then we talk about the aspects and impacts assessment, which I will cover it in the next slide. It's a little bit we have to explain about this aspect impact. So that is also going towards the implementation stage. And then coming out of these aspects is the significant environmental aspects. That's what we need to worry about. So we have to communicate the significant environmental aspects to the employees working in the area so that they are able to be more responsible in their activities to control these significant aspects. That is the communication. Then introduce the procedures, work instructions. So you can also involve them in the making of the work instructions, so they have a lot of ownership. Also, you can introduce these procedures and train them with respect to environmental management system. And waste management and control, whatever waste we are doing, how are we managing it, because there are a lot of legal implications around that. So we have to manage the waste properly so that we do not pollute the environment and we do not act irresponsibly. And how do we control the waste? If possible, we can reduce the waste and reuse as well as recycle. So ultimate thing should be, we should not have any waste going out of the plant. That is the best situation. But if at all it is going, it should be going towards authorized recyclers or authorized service providers who will be able to handle this waste responsibly. They are approved by the Pollution Control Board. Then start monitoring and measurement in every area, whatever parameters we have said in terms of environmental performance, emissions, release to water, and then release to land. We start monitoring these things and also measure certain characteristics of the environment so we can say whether we are improving or not. So that is why both monitoring and measurement both are important in the standard, which involves calibration of measuring equipment. When you measure certain things like gas levels or some pollution you are measuring, we need to be sure the measuring equipment is calibrated and the measurement traceability is maintained. So we can rely on the measurements coming out of this instrument. Okay, then we keep records of all those measurements as evidence of showing improvement in our performance. Also during the audit, this will be the objective evidence for discussion. Okay, so that's very important. Then conduct emergency response drills. Potential emergencies we identify from our significant environmental aspects, and then we look at simulating those kind of situation and see the employees' response, the department's response by conducting these drills. So the drills will help the organization to perfect the response in case of a real emergency. So that is why this is forming a part of the standard where we have to demonstrate our emergency preparedness by conducting these drills and keeping all the records and actions on the outcome of the drill. So that is why this is very important in the implementation stage. Now in implementation, we also need to understand these basic definitions so that we will be able to implement them better. Aspect, this word is very frequently used in the standard, aspect and impact. So what is aspect? Aspect is nothing but, as per the ISO 14001 definition, element of the organization's activities, products and services that interacts or can interact with the environment. That is what is called aspect. Or you can say a kind of activity of the organization. Like if you are having some kind of product which has got a stack, so there may be some gases escaping through the stack. So what we have to say is whatever process of operation, because of which what is the interaction of the environment, the gases are escaping through the chimney. So that can be one of the aspect. Okay, so that is aspect of products and services. Some organizations or service organizations, when they do servicing, they may use water which will be going into the drain. So we have to say that is a kind of aspect, water, used water or treated water going to the drain. So that is a kind of aspect. So this is what we have to say. What is the interaction of the environment? Environment here is air that we breathe, and the water we consume, and the land we live. So these are the three things which we say is environment. Apart from this, the flora and fauna, the aquatic life and other things are also considered in the environment. So we have to think about the interaction of our activities in the environment. So that is what is called aspect. Now when I say aspect, naturally we need to know what is the impact of that aspect. So that is nothing but change in the change to the environment, whether adverse or beneficial. That means positive impact and negative impact, both are important, wholly or partly resulting from an organization's environmental aspect. What can be a positive impact? We understand there are gases escaping through the chimney. There may be pollution polluting the atmosphere. The atmosphere can be degrading. So these are the negative side. Positive side, maybe you can look at canteen waste getting recycled by putting into biogas, and we are generating biogas for use in the kitchen. So this is a positive impact. So there is nothing wasted. We are reusing it and then in another form making as a fuel and giving it to the canteen. So it is a positive impact. So paper recycling, that is a usage of paper, but it is getting recycled. So that will be a positive impact. So activity will be recycling of paper. Impact will be reduction in pollution or reduction in cutting of trees, something like that. We can put as an impact. So impact can be positive as well as negative aspects. One aspect can have many impacts. Okay, one activity can have many aspects and one aspect can have many impacts. So like that, it will be a chain reaction. For example, you have one activity, there will be 2-3 interactions with the water, air and land. So there will be 3 aspects. So there can be more than 3 impacts. So that is why we have to analyze our activities clearly and understand the aspect and impact coming out of it. So then only we can understand which is the significant environmental aspect we have to focus on. Life cycle perspective. This is also very important thing to consider. First time introduced in the standard. It talks about the consecutive and interlinked stages of a product or service system from raw material acquisition or generation from natural resources to final disposal. That means whatever activities we are doing, the raw materials for that, right from acquisition of the raw material or usage from the natural resources till the product final end of life disposal. So what is the entire life cycle? We have to consider the environmental aspects of all these operations. What is within our control? What is beyond our control? We need to assess and give it a complete picture of what is the environmental aspect arising out of it. That's why it is called life cycle perspective. Okay, that means cradle to grave, means birth to death. The entire life cycle we have to consider. It is not that out of my factory it is gone, I am not responsible. We cannot say like that. We have to have a complete control of what we are releasing, what we are sending out, and what impact it can cause in the environment. And to the extent possible, we have to educate the customer. We have to make the customer aware so that he is not going to be polluting the environment because of our products, okay, and services. And then compliance obligations. This is a word used in ISO 14000 to represent the legal and other requirements. That is what is called compliance obligation. That means we are obliged to comply as an organization. Legal requirements that an organization has to comply with and other requirements that an organization has to or chooses to comply with. That means you are part of a member of a Confederation of Indian Industries or ASSOCHAM. These members have some kind of requirements towards environment. So we also need to fulfill. Apart from the legal requirements, we also need to fulfill those requirements. If you are part of a particular organization handling certain chemicals, like reduction of hazardous substances, ROHS standard, which talks about how do we minimize our hazardous substances in the operation. So like that, there are various organizations, responsible care, ROHS. These are all things which are in addition to the ISO requirements. We also need to comply with these requirements. This together is called compliance obligation. Now these aspects in life cycle perspective, we need to understand a little bit more. In this version of the standard, ISO has just hinted on this, use of this life cycle perspective. They have not made it mandatory. That's why you'll see the words consider as appropriate. They are not, making it strict for the organization to definitely implement certain things, but they are asking organization to, as a first step towards considering, like how risk-based thinking is introduced as a consideration in this 9001 standard. Similar way, this life cycle perspective is introduced as for a consideration. So right from design, you can see procurement, production, transport and delivery of our materials, and usage at the customer end, and finally after usage, end of life treatment and final disposal. So the entire life cycle we have to consider, and the center of it is identify aspects at each stage of the life cycle. Every stage, you see what is coming in the design, when we design our equipment and process, we should see that they are environmental friendly. They are reducing the wastage, or they are also limiting the exposure of gases in the atmosphere. So that way we have to design. We have to think of designing so that it can be cost effective also in the long run, and also it will be environmental friendly for the organization. Then procurement. When we procure raw materials, how are they transported? Are we transporting in an energy efficient manner, so we are using less fuel, or are they taking care of the environmental considerations, like whenever they transport, what all vehicles used, how is the spillage controlled, are they having all those controls? We have to ensure that. So since as a customer we can place the influence on the supplier to ensure that they are transported in a environmental friendly manner. Then when it comes to production, which is very much within your organization's control, how can we make reduce, reuse, recycle concept to look at the environmental impact of the organization? Then finally, when we transport the products to the market, how are we transporting in an energy efficient, environmental friendly manner? Vehicles what we are using, are they going to contribute to a lot of pollution in the atmosphere? Can we use a better mode of transport? All those things we can look at, so that we can also contribute to the environmental performance there. Then usage at the customer end, instructions for the customer, what always they should do so that they can minimize the environmental impact. The usage instructions towards environmental friendly way, how the packaging has to be disposed. Like you see in many packaging, responsible disposal is instructions are mentioned. Do not throw away, recycle properly, like that. There are some instructions given for the customer. After he starts removing the packaging, how to dispose of the packaging responsibly. Then once he use the product, at the end of life, like bottles, they say crush after use. That means people can recycle them, and then they can get it back. They don't want to just lie in the atmosphere and pollute the environment. That is why end of life treatment and final disposal. So like that, everywhere include environmental requirements. Consider as appropriate. These two words is very important. Consider means it is necessary to think about the topic, but it can be excluded. As I said, ISO is just teasing the organization to think about it on this level. Maybe next standard they will make it mandatory. We have to show that we have considered life cycle perspective right from raw material to end of life disposal. Okay, as appropriate means suitable and implies some degree of freedom. We cannot completely eliminate. We need to give some kind of freedom, but still we have to do something about it. That's where procurement, we can influence our suppliers to make environmental friendly products and services and supply to us. So that kind of influence as a customer we can do on our suppliers. That's why as appropriate is mentioned there, and other cases consider. Okay, this is a called life cycle perspective. Also, when we do environmental aspects assessment, we need to consider these things: emissions to air, what all activities we are doing, what is the interaction, what all is going through the air. If we have any number of stacks, we have to see some emissions happening through the stack. Then release to water, then release to land. These are the ways it can interact. Then use of space, because space is also very premium. You just go on accumulating more and more space, we are actually, the premium of space is being compromised. So we need to think of that, how we economize the space. And then use of energy, how we energy efficient ways we are using, so we are reducing our dependency on natural resources. Energy emitted like heat, noise, radiation, light, these are also going to improve the environmental conditions, so we need to focus on them. Then generation of waste and byproducts, whatever waste we are generating, we also need to think as a aspect and impact. Use of raw materials and natural resources, this is excess usage only we are talking about, not the normal usage. Like for example, you are working in organization, you need lights, fan, everything for comfortable working, but when you exit, you need to switch off the lights and fans so that energy is not wasted or abused. So like that, any usage for our operations is considered. Only excess usage has to be mentioned as a depletion of natural resources. Okay, so these are all the aspects you have to consider. And finally, we look at some examples. What is considered aspect and what is the impact? If I say air emissions going through the exhaust, that's a kind of aspect. What is the impact? Air quality getting degraded, atmospheric pollution. These are the words will come in the impact. Aspect will not talk about air pollution. It will only talk about the activity or the interaction. That's all. Air emission. But the impact is seen in the air quality degradation. Same way, water consumption and water resource depletion. Okay, fuel release, accidental spills happening, because of which stormwater getting contaminated. That is the impact. So like that, we have to be able to segregate the aspect and impact clearly for a better understanding of them and assessment of them. From this only, we will be knowing the significant environmental aspects. Same way, noise generation, the area nuisance, and energy consumption, increased emissions, fossil fuel consumption. That's a natural resource we are talking about. We consume less energy means we'll have less dependency on these fossil fuels. Paper recycled is a positive impact. Landfill space can be conserved, raw materials can be conserved. That means trees need not be cut for making more paper because we are recycling paper. These are some of the examples when we do the aspect assessment. The outcome of this is the significant environmental aspect. That's what we have to focus. We may have 1,000 aspects in an organization, but all of them are not important. Through this assessment, we come to know what are the significant environmental aspects for which we have to take up some management programs, or we have to implement certain controls to reduce the impact on the environment. So also under the compliance obligations, applicable legislations for EMS in India. Some of the laws and regulations we need to understand. We need to see in detail, but I'm just giving a hint of it is not an exhaustive list. At least some key pointers it will tell, so that you can go and do some research on them and see what way we have to comply on that. Like Water Act, Water Cess Act, Air Act, which we'll talk about. Permission to operate. You need to go as per Air Act and then get the permission from Pollution Control Board, and then submit the returns as per that. Environmental Protection Act, this is very important, 1986. Then hazardous waste rules, it gets amended. When you have this application, these legislations, we have to constantly look for updates and see what we need to comply more. That's why whenever amendments and things come, rules come, we have to look at what is applicable for our organization and then adopt them. Then public liability insurance, in case of any major explosion or something, what type of insurance we have to take. Under this act, we have to ensure that all these assets are insured, so there is a liability covered under that. Okay. Then environmental statement. Every organization is supposed to submit an environmental statement in September, considering all the raw materials used and all the waste generated and what is the kind of material balance. All that information is like showing the mirror to the organization. While submitting to the board, we are also looking at year after year, how are we improving on the performance? How are we reducing our dependency on raw materials? How are we recycling? How is our hazardous waste going down? So this all will come in the statement. It is like income tax return. We do the environmental return, which is submitted to the pollution control boards. And then National Environment Tribunal Act, this also will be adjudicating our various cases. So we need to understand the requirements as per that. Then biomedical waste rules. Suppose if you have a waste, occupational health and center or hospital operating, what is the kind of biomedical waste we are generating? How are we disposing that? Because that can be a huge problem in the environment if not disposed of properly. Then manufacturing, storage and import of hazardous chemicals. There is a rules 1996 and 2000. We also need to be aware of it. Whenever you are having hazardous chemicals, there are various restrictions with the usage and import and things. We have to follow those rules and regulations. Then ozone depleting substances, like in our air conditioner, we are using this Freon and all, which are basically ozone depleting. That means they will be removing the ozone layer, so ultraviolet rays from the sun and directly attack our skin, and skin cancer and other problems will come. So we are slowly removing these ozone depleting substances. We are having CFC free chemicals used in compressors, and there is a phased replacement of old air conditioners and chillers with the new environmental friendly chemicals. So we have to adopt these things. And then extended producer responsibility. This is the latest for plastic manufacturers. Extended producer responsibility. That means after you have sent it out of the factory, still you have got a responsibility towards the proper disposal, and that also has come from July onwards. This is going to be implemented. So if you are using plastic or anything in your products or packaging, you need to be aware of these requirements as well. Then e-waste management rules, all electronic waste, computer, printer and other things, PCBs and all, when we dispose of, we ensure that there are a lot of hazardous chemicals. It is considered as e-waste. It should be recycled or it should be sent to authorized service providers for recycling. And then Motor Vehicles Act, 1988 Amendment 2019, various pollution control cutoffs, under control certificates and engine tuning, maintenance, all this has to be done. So when we transport our materials, we are not polluting the environment through our vehicle operation, because when you talk about organization, so many vehicles are being used for transport of stock, transport of material and things like that. So we also ensure that all the vehicles we are using are complying to these Motor Vehicles Act and regulations. These are some of the environmental laws which we need to comply, but it is not the complete list. You can see what is applicable for your organization and then work on that. So these are all the things going in the implementation. Now we are going for the checking phase, where we are doing an internal audit by the organization on organization's procedures and processes. So that needs training to internal auditor. If they got already internal audit team as part of 9001, we can also train them on the 14001. It is easy because the structure is similar. We just need to introduce the environmental elements into it and train them about the aspects, impacts, waste controls, emergency response, how we have to see evidences in the departments. These are the things we have to train. Otherwise, a basic auditing style and auditing terminologies and how to audit things, they are already aware of. We just need to introduce the EMS elements to this training program. Okay, then set up the audit program well upfront. Audit is always a planned systematic exercise where we document everything. So we upfront communicate to the departments, and audit will be done impartially. That means a person from the department cannot audit their own department. All these things similar to the ISO 9000 will be there. Only thing, environmental part of it, we can do an integrated audit, including quality and environment. We can do an integrated audit also. Then audit schedule will be released, and then it will tell what all the auditees and auditor roles, all those things, and what all the scope of audit, everything will be here. Then ensure impartiality, very important, that people should not ignore that. Then documented information of the audit plan, audit schedule, audit notes, audit reports, checklist, everything has to be documented and maintained. Okay, then documents and records. When I say document, it is the schedule, it is the audit plan, and audit checklist will be kind of documents. Records will be the filled checklist, the audit notes, and the audit reports. These are the things. So both are important. Checklist, and then audit with a view towards improvement. As I said, fact finding and not fault finding. We have to see that organization is going towards improvement and not bickering with what is happening in the organization. So we have to suggest ways to improve, and that is the focus of the audit, and not finding fault in the audits on the departments. Okay, this is the internal audit. Once it is done, the findings are given to the management review, and then they take actions on that. Now coming to certification, the preparedness for certification. First step is select the certification body. It is always ideal to have the same certification body or registrar who has already certified the ISO 9001 system. So they understand our processes and products better. So it will be easy for them to audit the system, and it will also easy for us to communicate with them. So that is the best practice. Otherwise, as per customer requirement, if customer suggests we have to go with some other thing, we can also change the certification body. Prepare the employees for certification audit in terms of after the audit, what all findings are there, you correct them, you fix those problems, and then sensitize the employees about the audit, and then make them aware, like a refurbishment or a refresher training can be given to them, and also say what all things we need to do during the audit, the kind of etiquettes for the audit preparation. Okay, top management availability and support, very important during the audit. They have to be present, because there will be a lot of questions and interviews held with the top management to understand the organization's perspective, the strategy towards improving the performance. So that's why their presence is very important. They have to support through the audit. So in stage 1, they do desk or documentation audit. So the manuals will be sent to auditors. They may be present remotely, or they can even come to the site, but mainly it is a desk audit. That means they may be sitting in offices. They may not be looking at the facilities and processes. They will only verify the documentation and the standard requirements. So that will be a 100% conformance they will be looking at, because what is given in the standard, whether it is addressed in the manuals and documents or not, that's what they will be looking at. So it is called desk audit or documentation audit. Then once they are comfortable, or they are happy with the requirements being met as per standard, they will recommend for stage 2, where the on-site audit will be conducted. That's what is called certification audit. Here it will be on-site audit, where we will refer the requirements, and we will see the implementation evidences, and we will confirm the conformance to ISO 14001 in practice. Earlier in stage 1 it was theoretically proved. Now practically we have to see that conformance is there. That is what they look at. And then if there is any deviation, there will be some non-conformances, either minor or major, and you have to take the actions, corrective actions, corrections on them, and then go for certification. If there is no non-conformance, straight away the auditors can recommend certification for the organization. So this is how the steps are there in the implementation of this standard. Now your role in implementation of this standard, what all things we need to do. First of all, awareness about the policy, the environmental policy, and then significant aspect, not all aspects. We have to focus on the significant aspects which are contributing to the environmental performance in a negative or positive way. If it is positive, you do more of them. If it is negative, you do less and less of them. That's where the controls come in place. The procedures and work instructions will tell you how to control your impacts on the environment. Objectives which are taken to reduce the environmental issues, and there are environmental management programs also associated with that. These are all related to awareness. Then intimate or notify whenever you see non-conformances in terms of incidents happening, spillage, leakage happening. Please alert the supervisors and HODs immediately so that they can take some actions and they can do corrective action on them. Incidents, risk mitigate, opportunities means any recycling opportunities, any reuse opportunities, we have to maximize. That means implement those opportunities. Then follow the instructions given in work instruction procedure and monitor stated parameters. If whatever is to be monitored at the proper frequency, we monitor them and keep all the calibration of those instruments within the required frequency. Teamwork, which is very important. One person cannot do wonders, so there is nothing to gain in solitude. Let teamwork be your attitude. That should be the mantra for the implementation, where it's a teamwork which is effective. And then records, keep all records and it should be legible. And traceability means date of generation of the record, and it should have a signature. These things are very important for a record. So all records pertaining to EMS have to have these requirements. Then continual improvement, show improvements. There is always a better way of doing things. So you see, whenever you operate something, always you see spillage happening. You cannot take it for granted. Like, if you operate, there will be spillage. Why can't we think, how can you operate without any spillage? So like that, we have to see what we are doing and not take it for granted, and see a better way of doing things by which we can reduce our usage and reuse and recycle. These are the three things we have to use as a mantra for improvement in the environmental performance. Now, benefits of having ISO 14000 certification. Cost savings in waste, recycling, and consumption. That's the 3 R's giving the benefit in terms of cost by reducing our wastages. Then advantage over competitors when tendering for business. When your cost is improving, naturally your bottom line is going to improve. You will have a better margins. So when you quote for your products and services in tenders, you will be quoting a best price. So you may become a L1 bidder and you will win the tender. So that is the advantage over competitors because of your systems in place. Then management of environmental risk. When you do these aspects and risk assessment, you are also coming up with the significant aspects, so you can manage them better because you identified them, made the employees aware of it, and put in controls in place, and also management programs to take care of it. So we are managing the risk better. And compliance with the environmental regulations. By doing this compliance obligation requirement, we are also looking at what all legal requirements and other requirements applicable to the organization, and we are ensuring compliance to them on a regular basis. So our compliance level improves. So we are not getting any notices from the Pollution Control Board. We are not getting any penalties, and we are not risking closure of the organization because of our compliance levels. Demonstrating commitment to improving the environment. By doing these things, we are also telling the public about what all initiatives you have taken in terms of communication to the neighboring community and the corporate communications. We are showing that we are a good corporate citizen. We are showing our commitment, demonstrating it, not just talking in words. By actions, we are showing them by improving the environment around us. Show that you are a responsible, future-focused organization, a good corporate citizen. Future-focused means we have to think about the future. The resources what we have, they are getting depleted day after day. So what we can do to conserve these resources so future generations can benefit from that. That is what is called future focused organization. So the reduce, reuse, recycle again will be helping us to achieve that. Then can reduce insurance cover cost. When you have these emergency response drills and all these mechanisms in place, your insurance companies are also will be giving a consideration on the premium, because you have systems in place not to have any kind of accidents, spillage and leakage and things like that, so that they will have confidence that they may not have to lose a lot of money in covering this organization. So they may give a discount on these premiums. So that is also going to benefit the organization. Then can increase employee engagement and motivation towards environmental conservation. So when you sensitize your employees about environmental conservation, they are also taking ownership of their activities and they are getting accountable. So they feel they are responsible people and they are carrying on the activities of the organization without impacting the environment in a negative manner. So the employee empowerment and the engagement makes it happen. So they feel motivated and empowered to do this. Okay, these are the benefits of the standard. With this, I conclude my webinar and I open the forum for any questions you may have, which I can address. Yes.
Sir, I have a question. How to identify the compliance obligation for a company?
Yeah, I had given a list of various acts and regulations in this webinar. Also, for that, we need to look at the activities, products, and services of the organization. And what is the interaction? Through that, we have to suppose if there is no stack emission happening in the organization and there is no gases getting emitted in the processes, you don't have to worry about any air act or air emissions or air pollution for that matter. So the whole thing can be eliminated. But if you are making some dry process where there is no water being used, so there will be no discharge, or whatever you are having water, it is getting recycled within the plant. So that means water also you are not polluting, so you don't need to worry about any water pollution or any environmental pollution act, all those requirements. So it depends on the nature of the products and services of the organization and the interaction of the environment, air, water and land. These three are important. And then there are other things, too much noise is being generated, then we have to look at noise pollution, and there is an act and regulation. We have to ensure that we are complying to that. Factories Act will be applicable in certain cases. So like that, based on your nature of activities, this will be applicable. We cannot say a blanket requirement from all organization will be same. It will be varying from organization to organization.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have one question.
Yes, sir.
What is the purpose of conducting emergency drills?
As I mentioned earlier during the webinar, the emergency drills are perfecting our response to a real emergency. So when you conduct emergency drills, we are simulating a emergency situation, and then we are seeing the people and the department and the personal response to that emergency in terms of leakage, spillage, or evacuation, or any kind of explosion. How quickly people are able to react to that situation and assemble in a particular place, and taking containment measures so that the pollution is not going out of control. So these are the things we are only simulating, because in a real emergency happens, we don't know how we will behave. But we cannot say that we will not have any emergency, because risk is always there. We see accidents and incidents happening every day in various organizations. So we don't want to be in that situation. That's why we prepare ourselves to face that emergency. That's why we plan for the best, prepare for the worst. So that's why these drills are helping the organization to perfect the response as we go on correcting our issues. So we'll be really facing the emergency with confidence.
Hello, sir. I have one more question.
Yes.
How to determine the significant aspect for an organization?
Yeah, as I said, the aspect impact, the assessment, through that we have to do a kind of risk assessment where we look at severity and probability. These are the two factors. Whenever we look at an impact, we have to see what is the severity and how frequently or how likely that impact is going to occur in an organization. These are the two things, main consideration. Apart from that, we also need to consider the damage to property or image of the company, and also public, how they are going to be impacted, and whether it is a legal requirement violation. So these are the various considerations. We put those impacts and assess them by giving a proper quantitative rating. Then at the end of it, we get a rating which we can decide above certain rating, we will make it a significant. always organizations, it's better to have a one or two significant aspects so we can work on, so that we cannot say we don't have any significant aspect. Always best among the worst. We have to pick those ones, and then we reduce those impacts on the environment. So that is why we have to do a risk assessment of the environment through our operations.
Sir, I have one more question for you.
Yes.
Who will be the responsible person for implementing the ISO 14001 within an organization? Is it a specified person or personnel which is required to implement this particular standard?
As per ISO 14000, there is no requirement for management representative or anything. It is always the top management responsible for implementing and maintaining the system. But we cannot expect top management to be involved in each and everything. So you can delegate this activity to a kind of a management representative or appointee by the management, who will be having a kind of environmental responsibility, or he may be department head of health, safety and environment, or person who is associated with the laboratory or quality. He can also extend his responsibility to include this environmental management system. But ultimate accountability lies with the top management. But he can delegate certain activities, but accountability will still be remaining with the top management.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Do anyone else has any questions?
No more question. Thank you.
So I guess no one has any more questions now for Sitaraman sir. So we can now conclude this particular session. First of all, I would like to extend my lots of thanks to Mr. Srinivasan Sitaraman for this wonderful webinar today. The way you have shared your in-depth knowledge about today's topic was really exciting. I hope that the information shared today proves out to be extremely fruitful for all of our participants. I thank you for giving your valuable time and effort that you have invested to make this webinar a successful one. I also thank all the participants as well for taking out time to be a part of this webinar. I hope to see you all again soon. Wish you all best of luck on behalf of TNV Academy for your future endeavors. Thank you once again.
Thanks to the TNV team again for giving an opportunity to me to host this webinar. Really, it was an enjoyable experience for me, also sharing my knowledge to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.